Hello and welcome back to my channel. Again, I know that there's been some comments on the audio. I feel like I've done everything in my power to make it as good as possible. Nice mic, upping the decibels, but at this point, I feel like maybe it's just a lost cause, so I'm sorry if the audio isn't up to your standards, but we are going to go ahead and move on anyway. I am actually trying out just an old iPhone mic and seeing if that works. It's kind of the old kind that was hooked up to the headphones, and we'll see if that's any better. If not, we'll go back to the snowball, and that's just how it will be. Thank you for watching, and let's get right into the video.
You still don't know, do you?
So I really think that this has something to do with fragile and the truth. We know from the last game that Amelie is kind of she's an extinction entity, and for the most part, Sam seemed to understand what was going on. So I don't think this is about Amelie, but it just seems really strange, like his phrasing. You know, Higgs is acting differently than he did in the first game. His whole personality has changed. He's not as theatrical. So I am curious. The way he's treating Sam is so different than the first game, and to me that says that there's been some sort of adjustment to the story. I personally think that Higgs will have figured out that he was being used in some way, or he'll have some sort of, for lack of a better term, like come to Jesus moment where he realizes the error of his ways. Or again, I think he's in cahoots with Fragile. I think that he knows that something is up and that this is him being surprised. Why do you think I killed her? What do you mean no one's told you the truth? Which gives credence to my theory that he is not the one trying to kill anyone. I know it looks like that in the trailer, and I'll probably be wrong, but I still think we're going to find out that we were misled and that he's actually being helpful in that scene, even though it looks like he is, committing an atrocity. I think we're going to figure out something different. Something I've realized is I actually think he fights Red Samurai before he's speaking to Sam. So now that we are considering the trailer as a whole, it really seems like perhaps whenever Sam is shooting the robots and we see Higgs in the coffin, that's probably the intro. Then I think Red Samurai happens, and then I think that the scene where he takes Lou's pod happens. And the reason I think that is because the clips show one frame, this frame that we're looking at. Higgs is holding the pod in his hands, and the very next jump cut, the pod is actually on Sam, and I think that is out of order. And now, looking at the footage, so this is the next clip, he has the pod back on. Now, what confuses me is, so Higgs has taken the gun and thrown it across the room. That happens prior to him picking up Lou's pod. So we have Higgs takes the gun, says even the porter has to pull the trigger every once in a while, throws the gun, messes with Dahlman, then takes the pod off. Then Hideo shows us the clip where Red Samurai shows up. However, like I said, the pod is back on Sam, so either he reattached it or there's a clip in between him throwing the gun and looking at Lou, which again is kind of confusing. But actually, I guess we've just proven that the trailer is correct, because you can see that the umbilical cord that Higgs unplugged when he took Lou off the first time, that we talked about in the last video, is actually still there hanging down. So we have confirmed the timeline at least a little bit. And even though there is an really dramatic jump cut from Higgs holding the pod to him, I guess, having already put it back on Sam and then turning around to face Red Samurai. But at least now we know for sure that he holds Lou and then he sticks Lou, or whatever pod that is, back on Sam. For me, that just clarifies the situation. So Red Samurai has shown up after the pod has been activated. So perhaps whenever Higgs touched the pod, he allowed something into this world. Maybe he triggered whatever brings Red Samurai. The other idea that I had was that maybe Red Samurai is a sort of protector or defender, and whenever Higgs touches the pod, Lou sort of activates or gives a signal to this person, because we still don't know exactly how Lou's attached to the beach. It could be that, Higgs touching the pod activates it in some way and basically triggers a signal to wherever this Red Samurai is. Because I don't think that this is Lou, only because how would Lou know how to fight like a samurai? But then I want to, tackle my own theory and say if Lou is connected to the beach or the seam or whatever, then technically she would have access to all of history. So it's possible that in a way she's just downloaded the information, and then that would help make more sense why Red Samurai giggles like a baby whenever it is fighting. Perhaps the karate moves are just downloaded from the beach. So we basically hear Higgs say, what the F, and turns around. And that, to me, was a clear sign that he did not realize Red Samurai was coming, or this was not what he expected to happen. But the interesting thing about Red Samurai is if he had time to put Lou's pod back on Sam and then be facing him, then, that's probably 30 seconds to 1 minute. So it wasn't instantaneous Red Samurai showing up, which means there has to be some time delay if they're teleporting or using the beach in some way. Of course, what's interesting is we know from Death Stranding 1 that pretty much all teleporting, jumping beaches, etc., makes a noise. We know that for Higgs, it was kind of like a swoosh. It was the chirogram sound and some chiral particles, which we don't see any on Red Samurai. And we know with Amelie, it was pretty silent, but I feel like other than the first time with Die Hardman, when she's already in the room, she also has the same kind of chirogram noise. And then we have Fragile's jump, and the noise for Fragile's jump still makes a noise. It's like a whooshing noise, kind of like her umbrella almost makes a noise, I guess. But there's kind of like a sound of wind. And so either we've missed that noise because of the way he's cut the trailer, or Red Samurai doesn't make a noise, which is interesting because we've seen that, yeah, you can use the tar to kind of jump out like we saw with the motorcycle, but, that was pretty loud. It made like a noise whenever the motorcycle came out. And there's no remnants of it on the floor, so I don't think that they've appeared out of like a tar pit or anything. And then, of course, maybe the noise has been cut off, but you would think that Higgs would have heard something if there was a noise being made. So just putting that out there, that this may be a new form of jumping, teleporting movement that we've not seen before. The room that I have circled is actually the room where Sam fights Higgs in the coffin. So that's definitely the like starting area, I think. And then I believe that he gets brought in here. So his Odradek doesn't turn on, it doesn't target. So whatever Red Samurai is, either Higgs doesn't have his Odradek on and ready to work, which would be odd because we know that it was targeting earlier, like several minutes earlier it was working. But yeah, it's not targeting, which means that this must not be an entity that I would assume it's not a BT, which I do feel like we're going to get new BTs, as we call them, because in the last game, all BTs had umbilical cords connected from the ground up to them where they floated, so they were coming up through the ground. Whereas in this game, everything is connected by strings that are coming from the sky. And I'm curious if beached things will end up being spirits that couldn't pass over, and things with strings will be spirits that did pass over. So, for example, someone like Cliff would end up being a BT and would be connected to the real world still somehow. And so they would turn into a beached thing. But I feel like those who went into the water and crossed over to their own personal beaches will be connected by strings. Part of it is just because I think the way that the layers would work, that would make the most sense. So you would have kind of the tar belts, and then the seam and earth, and then the beach would be the highest level. So kind of like a heaven. And that would work with color theory. You know, you could have the purgatory area be blue, you could have the regular sort of area where Sam is at, so Earth, be like a yellow. I think of that as like how the pods and everything are yellow. And then I always think of, I guess the same, I was thinking the strings, like heaven is blue, it's very heavenly, but that would mean the seam would need to be red, which could match. I mean, hell is often red, and if you're forever in purgatory, that might be considered a special type of hell. But I know that the colors red, yellow, blue are used so often during this game that I think it would be a shame if we don't find out more about the color coding and see that it does have a role to play. Higgs also has a gun holster, which I assume is a gun holster. It could be a knife holster, but I think it's a gun holster. But that begs the question, where is his pistol? The gun that we see in the trailer, which now we've figured out, says Kelvin Armament Company, which I thought it said Revan, but when I looked at the more HD clips and then I had a comment telling me there's a photo out there, we now know that it's the Kelvin Armament Company, which is kind of funny because Wellmax is the other gun company, and when you hear something like Wellmax, it makes you think of health, and then when you think of Kelvin, you think of temperature, and I thought that was kind of a funny little play. Does it have something to do with health? Is it supposed to be kind of funny that something that can kill you has these kind of health related terms? Of course, Kelvin is also used in a lot of science, and it wouldn't be strange if the Kelvin Armament Company is able to withstand, so many things. So crazy temperatures. We know the world is really insane in this game right now. So it's very possible that it's just A means nothing and is just part of the game. It's just a new company. Or B, that it's meant to show how tough and durable their items are. Once Red Samurai cuts through them, they seem to disappear, but first, I think it's interesting how the sword works. So we know that just from watching the trailer and that clip, that he swings it out or she swings it out just like a normal samurai sword. However, this robot on the right side seems out of reach of the sword. So it's interesting that it still got hit. It makes me wonder if we'll have some sort of like beam come out of that sword at some point. I do think if we look at this samurai, his sword, or his Oh my gosh, that came out so wrong. The guy on the left has his gun up, but his other hand isn't up yet. So it was almost like he was trying to take aim and was already cut. So I think he must have spawned in. Red Samurai must have spawned into the game and very quickly taken action. So I do think that he probably teleported, jumped, whatever we want to call it. He spawned in. And I don't think that it was expected. And I don't think that there was a lot of reaction time because the robots, I mean, they seem fairly quick to action when we see them, attacking Sam in the trailer. So I wanted to point that out. This clip in as well because this is the first time that you can kind of see the insides of the robots. Obviously, they have a kind of solid core, but the pod on the back doesn't appear to be empty, or it just nicked the backpack, the stabilizer, whatever we think this is. So that was kind of disappointing that we couldn't see inside it. And this bot didn't even have time to move. It's not even looking in the right direction, and it still has its finger off the trigger, which is an interesting note that whatever these things are running these bots, they have enough knowledge of weapons to keep their finger off the trigger and have trigger safety. So that's an interesting concept, which is, I feel like, a very human concept. I also wonder if it's intentional that Red Samurai cut them all above the waist. Is there a certain point that you have to hit in order for them to go down in one swoop? As we see in the next clip, they disappear and basically despawn, implying, I think, that they have went back to wherever they come from. And even the armor shell completely disappears, which is an interesting concept. We don't typically see actual clothing despawn in game, but the whole robot goes away. So it made me think, what if, we've seen Sam in the trailer shoot them, I think I counted like 24 times, and they were still coming at us. What if it's something where we will get a sword, which would be a very interesting additional fighting mechanic, although I have not seen any evidence of that. But what if that makes it easier to kill these guys? What if cutting them in half effectively, snips their cord and sends them back where they belong? And the sheer size of this guy, like, I was kind of laughing because he just looks like he has so much in the trunk. But then when I thought about it, he is literally squatting, and he's really tall compared to these guys, and they are taller than Higgs, and we know that Higgs's mocap model and in-game model are fairly similar, and so he's 6'4", 6'3", something like that. So that's something to think about. This Red Samurai must be 7 foot tall. I mean, he is towering over these robots. Here you can see that they've actually started to despawn, and I wonder, are they chiral printed? That would make sense if that's how they despawn so fast, because we know that, vehicles in game can be dismantled fairly quickly, so it could just be something to do with that. Which begs the question, do they need the chiral network, or do they only need the chiral network to be created, and then, like our trucks and our motorcycles, are they able to, be used elsewhere? They don't actually need the chiral network to keep functioning. I like the way that he is standing. He turns around, he looks at us, kind of like, come on, or I'm ready. And I immediately noticed that he had like guarded armor similar to our motorcycle. We've talked about that before. It's just a really long version of it, but it's not necessarily the same. I couldn't tell any writing on it yet. Hopefully we'll see some in the fight. But it also had boots on, which I thought was kind of funny. We really don't see anyone wearing boots, which is a choice. I think I should rephrase that. We don't see anyone wearing really long boots, like fashion boots. We see a lot of like military style boots, but not a lot of fashion, like mid calf boots. The other thing about this robot is it's so oddly proportioned. It almost seems like there's something inside its head, like a pod inside its head, because its hands are tiny, 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 and so are its feet. But it has this massive, like, backside and like chest, torso area that doesn't necessarily fit with like its extremities. And finally, Higgs reaches for his weapon, which I feel like he waited quite a long time to do, which tells me he was curious. He was more interested in looking and understanding what he was seeing than he was about fighting, which, I mean, goodness, that tells me a couple things. That there's not a lot out there that he is fearing, that he's not, that he feels confident in his fighting abilities. And also, I think it might mean that he can't just bring fighters to him. You know, before he could just pull up a crony from the ground and send it after us. The BT lion, the BT squid, the BT whale. And while I think he can still control things, like I think the robot octopus thing that we fight in the trailer is going to be a Higgs creation, I'm not sure that he can just call upon things anymore. So the first thing he reaches for is a weapon, whereas in Death Stranding 1, the first thing he would reach for would be a theatrical line and then his mask, and then he would send a creature after us. I think the best evidence for this being Lou is the Odradek on the face. The reason I'm thinking this is like the best evidence is this is the original Odradek from Death Stranding 1. I mean, this is the one that we use all through the game. And I went through and tried to find photos of the Odradek in the trailer, and I was coming up really short. None of them look like the old Odradek. So this could be our first clue that this is some old technology. If we go with the book lore, then the Odradek was an extension of the person. It could read sort of your emotions, your feelings, and it would react accordingly. It also sort of, we know, hooks up with BB, because like it will give us a thumbs up or wave when we're out of danger. And so the Odradek works on sort of like a blood thing. It's not totally clear to me, but it doesn't appear to be, you know, connected to your spine or anything, but it does appear to read your blood somehow, which it seems very weird, but very common in Death Stranding. And we know that BB's blood and whoever is wearing a BB, that they like mix together. And so that's one of the problems. And Deadman says in the book that, you know, you have to be careful, Sam, because you hooking up to a BB could give you autotoxemia, which is typically what the BBs get whenever they're overstimulated, overused, and then they completely shut down and have to be taken to like a medical area. And in the book, Deadman tells Sam, you know, if you get autotoxemia, there's no coming back for you. Like, you'll just be dead, because we know that if Sam's body is irreparable, that he can't repatriate, basically. That's how they say it in the book. Now, in the game, I feel like that isn't as true, because I have blown myself up, I've fallen off of cliffs, and I've never got, you know, a permanent game over. Which, of course, it is a game. It's going to give you a continue. But, you know, in the book, they really made it seem like you would, I don't know. And it was weird, too, because in the book, they talk about, you know, you coming back as like a lump of flesh. And then, like, your eyes pop on and your bones pop in. But they also talk about how if you, if your body is too far gone, that Sam says he can't come back. He'll have to walk the beach forever. So that's a weird kind of thing, but I digress. I'm off topic. Basically, I just think it's interesting that this red samurai has an old school Odradek, meaning that if this is Lou, that can make sense, especially if we find out this is Sam's old Odradek, or maybe this is a decommissioned suit, or it doesn't appear to be built by a drawbridge because there's no drawbridge text or design elements to it, but maybe they hijacked one of Higgs's robots and, you know, made it work for them. Watching this in slow-mo, you can actually see the aux cord, which is what some people call his guts, comes out on its own and plugs into the guitar. So that's why I call it an aux cord. It does appear to be controlled by something else or to have autonomy, but I think we'll find out that it's just one of those things that because it's connected to Higgs, sort of like the Odradeks, that he's able to sort of tell it where to go. We can also see the robots disappearing in real time as they fight. Whenever the lightning hits the sword of the Red Samurai, you actually see a like chroma flash of like a rainbow, a full circle rainbow, and then it disappears into the smoke. It doesn't seem to teleport or jump. There's nothing to show us that this has happened, no visual indicators. It just disappears and reappears behind Higgs in the next clip. I absolutely think it's worth pointing out that neither of the Goonies that are holding Sam back there are reacting. Their face, Odradek, is not showing any exclamation points. They are not alerting. They are staying still. So, again, if they're connected to Higgs, then he must not feel any fear, anxiety, or need for backup in this moment. And if they're not connected to Higgs, then they personally don't fear whatever this red samurai is. I think most of my viewers agree that Higgs is selling some sort of cyber mech cargo, like the dogs and such. But I did want to zoom in on the cargo that we can actually see in the background. And while it doesn't have any identifiers, I do think the shape is important because the shape reminds me of the new Cupid, of coffin shapes, and also of Ethernet ports. If you've ever had a old school Ethernet that you plug directly into like a phone jack, something like that, before we have all the fancy Wi-Fi, that's what that jack looked like. And normally I would say that I was reaching, but with all of the computer stuff that has come to fruition and seeing the server on the beach, I actually don't think I am that far off. The dog had a sort of connecting umbilical cord that looked like it could be plugged in. Higgs himself has an umbilical cord, Odradek, that appears to plug into larger robots. So I don't think it's far off to assume that maybe they are shipping connections as well as the dog cargo, things like that. So this is the first time that we've seen his insides move, and this is what is inside of his abdomen area. It is a long aux-like cord, very reminiscent of plugging in an electric guitar, and once it's plugged in, he's able to have electricity go to the guitar. Now, what I will say is prior to this moment, the guitar is not lit up and it is not red. When you see in a moment, it has like a red, almost blade-like part to it. None of that is alive yet. So I think that he is literally either utilizing his own soul or Ka to create the electricity, because I believe that the strings and the lights that we see hanging down have something to do with Ka, just like the BTs had something to do with Ka. And I think he is literally strumming life force whenever he plugs it into his guitar. So once he plugs it in, it moves of its own accord, which is interesting. And I think Some people said that's why they thought he was a robot. I still don't think that has anything to do with it. I think we will find out that he is controlling it some way, but I just think it's going to be similar to how he's controlling like the cyborgs. I think it's going to have less to do with him having like special superpowers and more to do with him having a connection to the beach or something that is already like built in mechanically. If they can make a cyborg dog, I feel like they can make a suit that reacts to your thoughts. And the next most important thing is he looks excited. He looks pleased. Like he's happy to show off. So that's another reason that I feel like either Red Samurai isn't as strong as we are assuming, or again, he was surprised, so I don't think they've met before, but he doesn't seem to read Red Samurai as a threat. And the way that he grins is almost like he's excited for this. I'm also curious about the guitar. How does it work? Is there anything inside the guitar that's special, like how Higgs has the aux cord inside his abdomen? Because I'm thinking, like, could this be magnetic? Is the aux cord seeking out a source of power? Is it something like that, where it kind of is a homing device? It knows where it's going. I love that this has a whammy bar. I didn't realize that before, but yeah, there's a whammy bar on here. That's fun. Higgs strums it twice. After the aux cord plugs in, nothing happens. On the third strum, a light source appears, obviously from like an off screen lighting source that has surely been programmed into the game. It doesn't seem to come from the actual guitar. And I've left these at their base lighting. I haven't edited them or anything, just so you can see how Hideo intended. He made it very dark. There's a spotlight almost. And then we have the first spark. Now, if you are an eagle-eyed trailer watcher, you might have noticed there's a string down the middle. And that is the same string that we see on Tomorrow, that we see on Lou, and that we see the robots hanging from the sky from. And again, he is happy. He is live, laugh, loving. So I just find that interesting. I mean, he's not. We know he's kind of a freak from Death Stranding 1, but he just doesn't seem like he's scared that this is something that we should, worry about. He just seems like he's happy to be throwing down. So I just wonder, is this a regular occurrence or is he just still such a weirdo? We notice that tar begins to build the more that he plays the string of the guitar. So I think that we can definitely pretty confidently say that the reason maybe he's wearing this weird suit is because of his connection to the beach. I'm really thinking that something about his connection makes him excrete tar or brings tar to the surface. And it's very possible that how they use the tar lake is similar to whatever Higgs is doing. So he might be bringing the tar current closer in order to utilize its power. Something else I noticed is that he's holding his fingers like he has a guitar pick, but he's strumming with his thumb or maybe his pointer finger. It's a little hard to see in this. But that string did not appear until he connected. So I do think whatever these strings are, I think this is his personal string. Unless we somehow find out that he's like carrying Amelie with him, which I will say that rereading the book, I had forgotten that the reason that the pods are yellow is because they are supposed to be diluted blood. Now, if for some reason Higgs and Amelie did have a final speech on the beach or something like that, we know that she does have blood because she can cry blood if you try to kill her in the game. And it does make me wonder, could he have taken blood from her and could that be what's in his abdomen? I don't think so because the glass is yellow itself rather than how the BB's pod, the water was yellow, but the pod wasn't necessarily yellow. So just something to keep in mind, that while we're still trying to figure out how Amelie is a part of this, it may just be as simple as Amelie gave him her kipu whenever her beach was finally exploding. We know that he was left on her beach personally. And we also know that Amelie was able to leave her beach and take Sam back to the seam so that he could reconnect with Deadman and the other 4 people that were there to save him. And that's how he got repatriated for the final time, which is a whole nother discussion that I was having with a friend on Discord. There was no reason for Sam to repatriate at that point, um, because he hadn't died. You know, he went to the beach, he was on the beach. When he went in the water, he was repatriated. We see the animation for repatriation, and that should only happen if he's been injured or dead. Of course, they did say he was on the beach for over a month in real time, so it's possible that he just didn't have a body to come back to anymore. But that also doesn't make sense because Fragile sent his body to Amelie's beach. So I think we could have some interesting things happen. Maybe he's not a repatriate anymore. Maybe Lou isn't a repatriate anymore. Even though we see her in the like weird loading scenes in the trailer, I'm not totally sure that we won't be introduced to a new concept, just because if Amelie is technically disconnected and her beach no longer exists and she was the highest beach and now all the beaches are interconnected and free to use by whoever, it would make sense that maybe he had to repatriate so that he could reconnect to his body, and maybe he is whole now. We might find out that he isn't able to just repatriate like he could before, or maybe it will be a different version of repatriation. So just keep that in mind. It's an interesting idea. Back to our guitar, it's really interesting to me how it builds energy before it shoots. So it's almost like a laser in the way that it is charging, then shooting. And that's a lot of power from a single string. So if this is Higgs's own call that he is strumming or playing, then that's really cool because it tells us he's got a lot of energy. Um, but with it being that powerful, he probably is pulling from some sort of conglomerate on the beach, or heck, he could be pulling from the servers on the beach for all I know. But it just reminded me of like Cliff and the shared beaches that come from like shared misery. And it made me think, like, could he be pulling from a beach like that? We just don't know. Personally, I completely forgot that Red Samurai looked pregnant. When it first came out, there were some people that were putting out theories thinking that Rainey was inside of Red Samurai or that her baby was piloting Red Samurai. There were some interesting theories regarding maybe when she is in the real world, her baby is not, and when her baby is in the world, that she is not. I think that those were really cool concepts back when that's all we knew was just that Rainey was pregnant and we didn't know a lot more about it. Now it seems pretty obvious to me that Rainey's pretty consistently there. I don't think that she is like teleporting back and forth or anything like that. I do think the idea of a still mother being like a protector of some sort in Red Samurai would be a neat idea. Currently, I just think that maybe that's where the pod is, or the backpack, or whatever it is that's making these robots function. Um, because when it stood up straight in the clip that we were looking at before, it didn't look like that. It only gets this bulbous appearance when it bends down, which makes me think it must have something inside of it. And in a minute, we actually see that it has some bullet wounds on its chest and torso area. So maybe it's like an armored vessel. I'm here to once again push my Large Hadron Collider theory of the Higgs boson particle. I just think that a lot of the graphics and explosions in this game look so similar to it. We get our first look at that rainbow chromatic aberration that appeared. I might even call it a lens flare, the way that it shows up on our camera. The only real, lore that I have about this is I can only remember one time in the first game that we ever see a complete rainbow like this, where it's in a circle and not an upside down rainbow or a normal rainbow. And it is whenever we see Amelie for the first time. And she technically would not have a ha. She would be a ka only, because at that point Bridget had died. So she would only be a ka, and she walks into the frame and she has this full rainbow circle around her face. So here's the only clip that I could find of Amelie, and it does seem like it's the full circle, but we can't see the top of it. And then again, whenever we have Lou being basically like repatriated or born again at the end of the game, we see part of a rainbow, and it's right side up, but it's hard to tell if it's a full circle or not. So if we extrapolate based on what we know, Amelie, the extinction entity, her Ka no longer select or connected to her Ha, so just a soul has a full circle. She is now just one entity. She is the beach. And that gave her a full circle. With Lou being reborn, the only other time I've really noticed a rainbow in reference to a person being introduced, we see the top of a rainbow, a right side up rainbow, but we don't know if the top and the bottom are there. We just see the top, which I took to mean that the world was right again, and that obviously the time fall was now gone and wouldn't hurt anyone. It's at this point that I think still mothers will start waking up. There's really no reason for them to still be in comas, and unless someone has an order for that to continue, I would assume that they would start waking up at this point. What that might mean for us in terms of Red Samurai is that we know that this is Higgs's string weapon hitting the Red Samurai babies. What I would call an anti-weapon, sends you back to your maker. And I'm thinking that the full circle appears not because Red Samurai is like Amelie, but because these two weapons interacting are creating one piece. They're opposing forces. One is basically life, which is what I think the strings are, representing energies. And I think the sword can literally snuff out those energies. And so when life and death meet, I think you have a full circle. You have the circle of life. And with that, we are going to bring this video to a close. We're going to continue working through Red Samurai's outfit and the fight in our next video, and I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any lore comments or ideas, feel free to let me know. If there's a specific part in the video you'd like to talk about, if you will just timestamp it so I can find it, that would be great. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye!